Hi class, welcome to lesson 17. We're continuing our saga in microeconomics. Basically, last class we went over a couple important concepts in my opinion. Try to analyze the productivity of a firm, right? So we thought about, well, what was total productivity of labor, total product of labor, margin analysis we said was the MPL, or marginal product of labor, then APL, which is average product of labor. And that was a homework question too. We said, well, can you tell me what TPL means, MPL means, and finally write me the formula for APL. TPL, as you know, is the total output, right? But the key to that one, when you say, hey, what's TPL, is that you really want to stick to the fact that, okay, if you say that it's the total amount of output in a particular time period, but you got to make sure that you say the second part, which is it's at a fixed level of labor. Why is that? Because for every different varying level of input, could be labor, right? Your output differs, okay? So make sure that you say, well, total product of labor says that it's a total output, but it's given at a certain level of labor, okay? A quantity of labor, so that's really important understanding that. Second part we talked about was MPL. We said, what's MPL? We said that every time we add a particular worker or a number of workers, it just depends, right? We said, how is the total product of labor changing? And that's why MPL, when you define it, right, MPL would be is equal to the change, right, in TPL over the change in labor, right? So we're saying if we change the labor, right, how is our TPL being affected, right? And that's exactly what MPL asks. APL, on the other hand, which is the other part of the homework question I asked you guys, was that basically it says if you take the TPL, the total amount of product that I'm making, and you divide that by the labor that I have, well, what is that? And that's APL. Okay, so this is marginal analysis, average analysis. Both are very important, and we covered that in the last lesson. But this is the recap / homework part. Okay, so this lesson we're going to go over costs. Okay, so we've said, all right, so we talked about productivity. Now we're moving on to costs, okay? And we'll start off with short-run costs. The reason why it's so important is always, before when we talked about economics, right, microeconomics specifically, we said, well, are we a consumer or are we a producer, right? Because answers are different based on the fact that are you thinking as a producer or are you thinking as a consumer? In this part, we're thinking, is it production or is it costs, right? Both of them are very much related, okay? And later on in the lesson, I'll try to explain to you guys how they're related to each other. But production and costs are obviously related to each other, right? Because one is dependent on the other. Okay, so the first one we're going to go over is short-run costs, and we're going to define again 3 terms. So let me start over here, okay? So short-run costs. Okay, so what are my short-run costs? The first term that we're going to use is a term called total fixed costs, or TFC. Okay, so I'm going to write that down, which is total fixed cost. And the way we write that down is TFC again. Okay. And how do you define that? Well, it says that total fixed costs are the costs that do not vary with changes in the short-run output. Okay, so let's write that down. They're the costs that do not vary, in short-run output. Okay. Okay, they do not vary in short-run output. They must be even paid when output is 0. That's the other term for it. So even paid, I'll write it down too in parentheses. Paid even if output is 0. What do we mean by that? Well, we say, okay, so our previous example we used is pizza. This time I'm going to move on to a new food, I guess we're going to stick to food because people normally think of that, right? We'll stick to, you know, I don't know, we were having M&Ms the other day, okay? So let's stick to a factory that makes M&Ms, okay? So they're making candy, they're making chocolate, okay? So it says that, okay, so you know, we're taking a company called Hershey's, right? Or Nestle, choose whatever you like. But, you know, if you have a Cadbury factory and it makes chocolate, okay, basically says that, you know, no matter, even if I'm making zero chocolate, okay, in the short run, okay, one input is fixed. We said that was capital. We said that's maybe like a plant. So in that factory that I paid for that year, even if I produce zero chocolate, I still have to pay for that factory, okay? Still have to pay for rent, might have to pay for utilities, whatever it is, but there is a certain amount that still needs to be paid, and that's your fixed cost, okay? So even if the output is zero, okay, which says here, we still need to pay our total fixed costs. So our total fixed costs are the costs that do not vary in the short run, okay? Pretty straightforward, but extremely important in understanding what it is. So that's TFC for you, it's total fixed costs, okay? Next concept we're gonna go over is total variable costs, okay? So that being said, let me go ahead and erase this. So we cover TVC, or total variable costs, okay? So change that, go, fixed will go away. I'll just change this definition. And then I'll change TFC to TVC, which is total variable cost. This F is going to go away. And like magic, it's going to turn to TVC. All right, so it's total fixed, total variable. I apologize. Total variable costs. Okay, so what's total variable cost, or TVC? Okay, TVC basically says it's the costs that change with the level of output. Pretty much the exact opposite of total fixed, right? So you said, well, when fixed, so no matter what the output is, even if the output is zero, right, we still, our fixed costs are not going to change. They are permanent, right? Total variable costs are costs, again, pretty intuitive, guys, costs that change with the level of output. Okay, so that's TVC, right? So TVC is basically the costs that change with the level of output. What do we mean by this? Well, typically take an example, right? We say labor. Okay, so in the factory that we make chocolate, okay, I have one worker versus two workers. Obviously, if I have two workers, this is kind of, you know, straightforward, but we have to say this, you know, labor would be a variable cost because for two workers and one worker, there's a difference in the pay that I have to pay, right? So if I have two workers, I have to pay obviously twice as much I have to pay for one worker, okay? That's, you know, obviously thinking that both of them are getting paid the same amount. But the point is that the more amount of workers you have, typically you have to pay more amount of money, right? So that's why it's variable. Labor is variable. Against capital, right, we said factory. If you have only one factory, no matter how much chocolate you produce in that factory, you're not going to get another factory, right? So that's why capital is fixed, and we said that labor is not in the short run, right? So that's total variable costs. The last term we have is total cost, which kind of brings and is the happy marriage between both total variable costs and total fixed costs, okay? So that being said, let me use this part of the board here to use total cost, right? So total cost, we said, is a sum of the total fixed and total variable costs at each level of output. Okay, so what is total cost? Total cost is TC, okay, that stands for total cost, or costs, could be anyone you want, right? Total cost, TC, is equal to your total fixed costs, TFC, plus your total variable costs, okay? That's the basic equation that we use. Now, total costs, you know, definition-wise, are total costs are to do the sum of total fixed and variable costs The other kind of warning I have is it's at each level of output, okay? So that's one thing that we have to say is at each level of output. Why? Because every time we change the level of output, it changes, right? If I have 2 workers that produce more, that's going to be a different cost than if I have 1 worker, okay? So we talked about TFC, which is the total fixed cost. We talked about TVC, which is variable, and then together that they form the total costs. These are important in understanding short-run costs, okay? Because whenever I talk about short-run costs in the future, I'm going to refer to these 3 things, right? I can say, hey, this is the total variable cost, total fixed cost, and the total cost, okay? That being said, let me move on, try to define more terms, and then maybe use a chart, again, as I did last class, to kind of help you guys understand mathematically how that translates to an actual problem. Okay, so let me see here. I'm going to try to define, actually before that, you know what I'll do is I'll graph, because I promised you guys in the last class that I'll graph and, don't want to violate my promises that I made to you guys, right? So we'll try to graph it out, try to see how these play out in the, on the graphs in our models. Another graph, actually, I'm going to first draw is going to be from last class. And it's, it talks about 2 terms that we talked about in terms of productivity. We said, well, we talked about MPL, which is marginal productive labor. We said APL, which is average productive labor. So first, I'm going to try to graph those 2. And then I want to compare to these new terms that we talked about with the short run cost, with the, TFC, TVC, and TC. Okay, so that being said, let's talk about this first graph, which is going to have over here, it's going to have a graph of MPL and APL. Okay. So here I'm going to have the product that you had before, right? We talked about in our previous example. We said pizza, right? So this is going to be pizza per week or whatever you want it. Doesn't matter how you define it, right? Pizza per week. Okay. That K is absolutely gone. Okay, there we go. Week. And here is going to be labor. Okay, on the x-axis is going to be labor. All right. So that being said, if you take your average productive labor and marginal productive labor, typically speaking, there are 3 guiding principles to having a graph of MPL and APL. Okay. So the first guiding principle we say is that if MPL, your marginal productive labor, is greater than average productive labor, okay? Does that ever make sense? If MPL is greater than APL, APL is going to be rising. PL is rising. Okay? Now the other side of it is, what if MPL, right, marginal productive labor, is less than APL? Okay? Then APL is going to be, you guys can probably guess it, is going to be falling. Okay? That's going to be falling. Last part is, what if they equal each other? Well, this happens at a specific point. It's going to help us kind of graph it. APL equals MPL, okay, at the peak of APL. So at APL's peak. Okay? So first I'm going to draw IPL, okay, your average productive labor, right? So let me make sure I get this right. Okay, and I am. All right. So if I have this, it comes down like that, okay? And this is going to be your APL, okay? Your MPL, okay, is going to produce all right. Now, the point is that it was supposed to be the peak. Okay, guys, that was supposed to be the peak. I can change the graph a little bit so that you guys can understand that that's the peak of it. Okay, but the point is that, we said that, okay, well, MPL, and this is MPL, right? MPL is greater than APL, it's rising. I have mixed these products up, haven't I? I have. All right, class, this is how you not make mistakes, okay? So these 2 graphs are actually opposite, okay? APL and MPL. Let me make sure I have this right before I start lecturing on it. Okay, so that's MPL and that's APL. So I said, okay, so let's actually run through it, okay? And let's follow our principles. We said as MPL is greater than APL, APL is rising. Okay, so here if you said MPL is greater than APL, APL is going to rise. All right, if MPL is less than APL, okay, that's good. All right, we did get it right. This is APL and this is MPL. Okay, and that's the way you graph it, okay? Now, it's really important to understand these two graphs because you sort of get the feeling of, okay, well, what's going to dictate most? In my opinion, when you analyze something, okay, when you want to analyze something, your MPL is more important, okay? Why is MPL important? If I'm a producer and I'm making a certain product, okay, we said pizza, right? I always want to think, you know, if I am adding an extra worker, okay, one, is it worth it for me, okay? Is he adding enough marginal productivity, okay? Is he adding enough to my total product, okay, to make sure that he's worth the pay, okay? So to a producer, MPL is much more important than APL, okay? Much more important. So these two graphs, just graphically, that's how it plays. Normally speaking, what I want you guys to do is when you have a chart, okay, and they want you to graph it, use the chart, make sure the numbers are correct so that, you know, you don't end up making mistakes like we just did in the past, okay? So make sure you use a chart to guide you and use those numbers and data to kind of chart and, you know, understand these numbers are matching as such, okay? But generally speaking, these three are the guiding rules for your MPL and APL graphs, okay? MPL is greater than APL, APL is rising, MPL is less than APL, APL is falling, APL is equal to MPL at its peak, all right? So APL is, so this is APL, MPL, and we're all fine here. Okay, so the second graph I want you guys to know is going to show you the total fixed cost, total variable cost, and total costs, okay? And let me go ahead and use that side of the board actually so that you guys can see this graph. And let me erase this part so that we graph TFC, TAC, excuse me, TFC, TVC, and TC, all right? So how do we graph these costs? All right, the first part is going to be obviously having a y and x axis, right? First question in economics you always want to ask is what's my x-axis, what's my y-axis? Because I guarantee on the AP test they're going to be looking for those axes. Are they correctly labeled, okay? And are they actually showing the right y-axis and the x-axis? So always make sure you have the right y-axis and x-axis. So whenever you look at any graph in economics, I want you all to think about, okay, what is my y-axis and what's my x-axis, okay? And one, I'll give you a hint, x is always the independent variable, y is the dependent variable, okay? So understand that, okay? That being said, let's talk about your y-axis here. I'm going to say pizza per minute or whatever it is. Okay, this could be in the short run, could be anything, right? Pizza per week, pizza per month. It just depends how you define your short run and long run. And remember how I told you guys the differences, right? It's in terms of inputs being fixed and variable. All right, so this is your x-axis, and your y-axis is going to be just dollars, okay? It's going to be your money. And this is going to talk about your total costs, okay? The three variables we're talking about today is TVC, total variable costs, TFC, total fixed costs, and finally total costs as well, okay? TFC and TVC together, total fixed costs and TVC, total variable costs together form total costs, okay? So let's start off with the first line, which is going to be your fixed costs. Now, your total fixed costs, I said, won't change for no matter what the level of output is, correct? So if this is the level of output, guess how fixed line will look like? It'll be flat. Does that make sense? So your fixed is not going to change. That's your TFC because it's not going to change, right? No matter what my level, how much pizza I'm making, right? We're always going to pay the same rent. We're always going to pay the same amount of electricity, okay? Well, considering that the machines are always on or whatever, but generally speaking, your fixed costs are not going to change, okay? Does that make sense? Otherwise, they'll be variable, all right? Understand that. Okay, so we got the TFC down. Now the point is, where is TVC? All right, TVC is going to look something like this, okay? Okay, it's going to look something like that. Why does TVC look like that? Okay. Now, the reason why TVC actually accelerates, okay, is because as you add more workers, right? This is like, for like, I don't know, your 50 pizzas per minute or 100 pizzas per minute, whatever it is. As you increase the production, it becomes really expensive for the manufacturer to make that pizza, okay, or for that restaurant to make that pizza. Because for every extra pizza you're adding, right, it costs more and more, okay? So your marginal costs actually increase, okay? And marginal utility was decreasing, marginal costs actually increase, okay? And I'm going to go ahead and draw those graphs later on to show you guys marginal analysis. But the point is that total variable costs actually accelerate, okay, as you produce more, right? So as your level of output increases this way, right, your TVC is actually accelerating. Now, what did I say? I said the last one to graph is total costs, okay? And we said that total costs are just adding these two together. This is TFC over here. This is flat line over here is TFC. This is TVC, right? So your total costs are just going to look like this, similar to your total variable costs. And notice what's going to happen, right? As you proceed, right? As you proceed and your level of output increases, okay? Your TC, right? This is your TC. Your total costs are going to look a lot like your TVC. Why is this? Well, it's really important to understand your fixed costs, right, are not going to change, okay? So if your fixed costs are not going to change, right, imagine like if I have my fixed costs, right, my FC is my fixed costs, okay? And I'm gonna put this on the top, okay? So this is my total fixed cost, TFC over here, all right? And this is the level of output, Q, okay? I'll give you an example. My total fixed costs, I said, don't change, all right? So what if I say that total fixed costs, or for this example, I'm gonna say is $10, okay? So $10 a month is my total fixed costs. Now, if I produce 5 boxes of pizza, okay, then it's going to be, the ratio is going to be 2, okay? But imagine, as I'm increasing my quantity, imagine this is more like 50, right? Your fixed cost, the ratio has just gone down by a lot, right? So as your quantity increases, okay, your total fixed cost is not going to matter anymore, okay? And your TVC is going to be the most important cost, okay? So I'm going to say that one more time. As you produce more and as you increase your level of output, your total fixed costs are not going to matter as much in relation to your output, and your total variable costs are what matter, which is why your total cost line is kind of going to look more like your total variable line as you go out to infinity in terms of your employment. Okay, so this is how this graph looks like, guys, and it's pretty important to understand it. Again, I always recommend if they're giving you a chart to look at the data and plot it using that data, because you have a much more accurate graph, so you're not just looking at it and eyeing it. But I recommend looking at these graphs and just understanding, okay, well, my total fixed cost is sort of like a fixed line. It's not going to move. Total variable costs, is going to accelerate as you go on and produce more. Total costs are actually going to look more like TVC as you go on to infinity in terms of employment or in terms of output. Okay, so this is the graph for this one. Over here, I'm going to erase this. I'm going to move on to average and marginal costs, continuing the understanding of costs so that we can define them, and then finally, make fancy models with it so that we can actually understand something and make sense out of it. Okay, so let me erase this and then move on to average and marginal costs. I hope everyone was with me so far. Okay, if the graphs are not making too much sense to you guys, I really recommend just starting off with like the charts, the tables that we talked about in the last class. I'll also go over a table in this class actually. Actually, before I move on to marginal average cost, let me do that. Let me actually use this side of the board to go over maybe a table that talks about AFC, AVC, ATC, and MC, so that we know all the costs. So actually, I correct that. Let me correct that. Before I draw my graph or my table, let me define these terms that I'm going to talk about, okay? So this chapter is going to be called marginal and average costs, okay? Marginal and average costs, okay? All right, so marginal average cost. What's my first term? Well, surprise, surprise, it's marginal cost, okay? So let me talk about marginal cost. Okay, so marginal cost is defined as the following, and I'm pretty sure at this point, margin analysis is getting hopefully a little more intuitive to guys, because you'd say, okay, what's going to happen if I add one more unit? So marginal cost, if you're probably guessing, which is a good guess if you guess this, is that if I add one more unit, what's going to happen to my cost, right? What's going to happen to my total cost? So marginal cost is defined as the following. It's defined as the addition cost of producing one more unit of output. Okay? So as the additional cost, let's write this down, additional cost of producing one more unit, okay? And that's exactly what we said before, right? Now, the way, unit of output, okay, that's going to be output of output. The way we have always talked about this is that, what's going to happen if I add one more? That's what marginal analysis says, and exactly what happens. Marginal cost, say if I had one more level unit in my output, what's going to happen to my cost? The way we put this down in the formula, okay, is that MC, again, guys, we're always like abbreviations. MC is marginal cost, okay, is equivalent to the change in your total cost, right? What's happening in my total cost, or the change in output, or Q, okay? The way we measure output is via Q, quantity, okay? And you're saying change in total cost, okay? So marginal cost basically saying, if I change my level of output, as in Q, what's going to happen to my total cost, okay? That's marginal cost. I'm going to come back with average cost and average variable and average fixed cost later on in the next lesson. But before I let you guys go, let me quickly summarize what we went over today. Basically, what we try to do is try to graph our average costs in terms of, how does my average cost look versus my fixed costs and my variable costs? How do they look to total costs? And then how does my, in terms of productivity, how does my MPL look versus my APL? Okay, average productive labor. How does that look versus the marginal productive labor? And we try to graph that. Okay. Before that, I believe we try to talk about the differences in terms of your graphically speaking. To do your APL, MPL, I just recapped that. So this was more of just a graph kind of lesson. I think it's really important to graph these just to understand how it generally looks like, the trends. But more importantly, I think, by defining these marginal and average costs, we've started with marginal cost. We're going to move on to the average cost part. I think what's really important is that, we've gone over the graphs. We're going to go over the tables, and then hopefully this all makes sense for you guys mathematically, because I think theory definition is one as such, but I think I really want you guys to understand, okay, how does this actually translate? But please don't discount theory and understand the definition. So that being said, the next lesson we're going to go over, finished average costs, define average costs, go with the table, talk to you guys, average fixed costs, average variable costs, marginal costs, how to calculate those. And then we'll graph them as well. And then we'll move on to more stuff about the firm. Okay? That being said, as usual, I'll give you guys a homework problem. The homework problem for you guys today is graph me total variable costs, total fixed costs, and then total costs. Okay? The answer is on that side of the board. Okay? You can see it. But the point is to do it by yourself and understand, okay, well, my fixed cost is constant, my total variable cost changes. How does my total cost change with my total variable and total fixed cost, okay? So graph me total TVC, TFC, and TC and come back with the next lesson. We're going to have more exciting definitions for you guys for marginal costs, average costs, and then put a table together and so you can be more clear and precise and understand it, hopefully, and wrap up lesson on the firm specifically for microeconomics. Thank you so much for joining me for this lesson. Hopefully we'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you.